Ladies and gentlemen, the market is hot at the moment, and when the market is hot, people start turning to off the plan because there's more stock and more stock options. We're going to teach you about the clause to watch out for, the biggest clause to watch out for the most right now. Stay tuned.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Morning Minutes, episode 374. Sunset clauses, buying off the plan. Can you get screwed if the developer takes too long? That's a big thing with when buying off the plan. There's obviously a marketing date where they say they would like to. Hey, Tony, this one's just for you. Thanks for watching yesterday. There's the marketing expectation when the agent is selling the property, but that's not binding. That doesn't mean anything. What means something is the sunset clause. I know a few years ago that was especially up before 2019, when we had a big boom in the property market. I think it was 15 to 17. There was some shady dealings with developers, some for legitimate reasons and some not for. This morning, myself, Michael Bergio, and Mark Novak will be talking about sunset clauses.
I was just doing some hand signals this morning to assist you and all of that, Michael.
Yeah, you're doing the sign language.
Sunset. Yeah.
Mark, bring us in. Good. Talk about it where it goes wrong with sunset clauses.
Yeah, look, it's the biggest. It's probably one of the top three, or the top three.
Well, what is the sunset clause? Probably. What is the sunset clause?
So it's probably the biggest question a purchaser asks. So, when they're opposite an off-the-plan agent, one of the top three questions is, when is this place going to be ready? Now, what comes out of the real estate agent's mouth, and what comes out of the developer's mouth, and what comes out of the builder's mouth should hopefully be all the same thing and should go into a contract. It's worded in a contract by way of a thing called a sunset clause. It's the, oh shit, when is this thing going to be ready? The clock that everyone beats by, that a purchaser commits to, that a seller commits to.
Yeah, and up until it gives a little bit of leeway. Like, there's always delay. So if the construction hasn't started, it can be typically 2 years. I've seen as long as 3, but you sort of, depending obviously how big the project, could be 18 months. But there's always sometimes the buyer thinks it's a bad thing if it's really long, because then the builder can take up until that time. But you've got to think the builder is generally wanting to get it done the fastest, because they've got so much capital put into the property. They don't get any payday until it's finished. So majority of the time, they're in line with your wants. They want it completed. They want you in so they can cash out as well. But a lot of time the buyer will think, well, they could drag it out 3 years. But also, I like to remind buyers, that means that you've got that security and that tenure, because especially in the Sydney property market, the property value goes up. So it could be worth a lot of money in 3 years. And for whatever reason, you don't want to have a 12-month sunset clause. It takes 2 years to build, but the market went up 15%, and basically the contract can be terminated. So you've really got to look at the size of the project, what you're looking for, and it's not necessarily a bad thing having a long sunset clause. But prior to 2019, where a lot of issues came up, there was big market growth. And do you want to go through that, Mark, and what some developers did?
Yeah, and I just want to give a kindergarten example of quantify the quantum of this. So if you're a buyer and you've bought an apartment for $500,000, okay, you're 20 years of age, you bought something for $500,000. This is how serious this is, guys, this sunset clause if you're buying off the plan. Say it was a 3-year project, big building, Alexandria, huge. You've spent 500 Gs. If the market's actually a pretty good market, it may do 10% year one, 10% year two, 10% year three. Your $500,000 unit went to 550, and you'd only paid down a 10% deposit. 550 then turned to 605. 605 then turned to 670, say, right? So you've made potentially 170 grand. Now, you haven't even settled on the thing. You've only put down 10%. Your sunset clause says the thing's going to be ready in 3 years.
Yeah.
What was actually happening is developers were getting a sniff of that, going, oh shit, we've left a lot of money on the table. Can we get out of these contracts?
Yeah, because if you got 100 units, Mark, and they've all gone up 150 grand, they want to find any sort of technicality to get out of it. And up until, which Tony mentioned, the question that brought this on yesterday was Tony asked, what changes or new legislation regulations have come in with the sunset clause? So to describe what it was previously to the changes, it was pretty weak, the terminology, the wording in a contract, but not only in the contract, the legislation behind it. And what I mean by weak was it could just go past that date without any real due course. It could. So, for example, let's say the building's finished, you've still got to get your strata plan, your fire certificate. Many certificates come after for it to be approved before it's technically got the OC. So some developers were delaying the final stages. Let's say you finish the building in January, but your sunset clause was March. And if you can delay the finishing of the building past March, you can terminate those 100 contracts. You can resell that building for $15 million extra. So there's a pretty big incentive for a developer, for this example, to delay.
For 100 units, it was almost the sunset clause was the clause that made them $15 million by screwing over 100 buyers. So guys and girls who are watching, great that Tony brought this up, but if you are buying off the plan, the world has changed since 2019. The government cottoned on to sunset clauses being shit. And what have they done?
Yes, so they've entered into basically, even if the sunset clause said March, to be able to terminate those, there's a couple of things they've done. They added extra sunset. So if the sunset was March, in the buyer's interest, the buyer can extend, I think it's 12 months. Just say, no, you've got an additional 12 months and the developer can't terminate the contract. But not only that, they've entered in...
the other way around, sorry.
The buyer can extend it.
No, the vendor. There was in the developer section there, they can make an extension, but that has to be written into the contract.
Yeah. And then not only that, if the developer wanted to terminate the contract, they had to go to the Supreme Court and they had to prove without sort of reasonable doubt that it could not be completed. And even if the building was completed, but they were only waiting for a fire safety certificate, that wasn't sufficient enough to terminate the contracts. So they just made...
Yeah.
So there wasn't...
Yeah, so it basically took the power off the solicitor, the purchaser, or the vendor, the developer, and it put the decision or the adjudication in an independent party's hand to make that decision if the developer was being naughty or if the developer was genuinely not being able to complete the project at all. So that would be based on evidence and a decision would be made on that. Real clever.
Yes, and a lot of those proceedings have heavily gone in the favour of the buyers. And then even at the extent of, so that's towards the end of it, but you made the good point off air when we talk about the economic if it was feasible for the developer. So, Mark, do you want to go through just even, let's say you bought off the plan, they haven't started construction, but maybe zoning changed or they were able to get more, just something changed and they wanted to get rid of it. So
there may be a genuine hardship or genuine error on behalf of the developer where they simply can't proceed with the building of the building, and they choose to exercise the sunset clause non-completion, and they turn up to court and they prove that they can't proceed with it. You sort of got to understand that as well, because that was proven in a court of law. But I guess the bottom line, Michael, is this is stuff that screwed over purchasers for 5, 10, 15 years, and this is stuff that the government was heavily complained on by purchasers, and the government has now sorted out. Good on the government. It's been going well for 2 years now.
Yeah, but on top of what you said about that developer not being able to proceed, the incoming developer has to honour the contracts, because before the argument was you bought it with that developer, they've gone under, they're done. Because what some people did was they would close one company, sell it to another, pay the extra stamp duty on that sale, but they get $15 million more in property prices. But they fattened up that to say, no, the incoming developer has to prove without a reasonable doubt that site can't be bought if they honour those contracts. And if they can't do that, then they have to honour it. Regardless if they can get 300 grand more for the unit, they have to prove building it and selling it at the original price basically doesn't make a little bit of profit. Yes, they could make more. So many of those little changes happened to just protect the buyer in the interest, because we had a big upswing in the market. And it was really disgusting to hear a lot of things that happened.
So in summary, if you've just tuned in, we're talking about buying off the plan. One of the biggest things to watch out for, the sunset clause. We're saying at the moment the protection is much better around it. You may have heard people that have been burnt on the sunset clause. That is probably before the new legislation came in early 2019. Definitely, this is where the purchasers make a lot of their profit, because it goes for 1 or 2, 3 years where they've only put down a 10% deposit and the property price rises. So at the moment, off the plan's looking pretty good on the back of capital growth. It's looking pretty rosy at the moment.
Yep, and I just put a link into a really good article going through it. There's a lot of changes when it came to fixtures, fittings, draft strata plans, what they have to provide. But I put the link in there so you can have a read of that. But the big thing with the sunset clauses was what we discussed today, which really scared people. Tony said, much appreciated. Bottom line is there is now legal recourse. And yes, 100%. So that's where that extra backing was. So even if both lawyers the vendor's lawyer as a developer would write a really shit clause in the sale contract, the legislation now protects you, which really wasn't strong before. Even if there's almost just one word written, sunset clause, in the purchasing contract, the legislation protects you. That's the big thing of it. And Tony, thank you for asking the questions. We encourage everyone to give us topics. We're happy to research, talk about it, and go through it. Thank you, everyone.
Awesome.
Cheers. Bye.
Have a good one. Love you, everyone. See you. Bye. Have a great day. Sun's out. Looks like there's the last couple of days of summer, I reckon.
Yeah. Look at the
yesterday
background.
Was cold.
Cold. Bring the summer. All righty, guys.